call the meeting to order. Would everyone please rise? I'm going to ask Dave Becker to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone, to the quarterly review meeting. We're looking at the last fiscal year for the quarter ended June 30th. The meeting is intentionally held in late September to provide more time for the Finance Department, the auditors, and our outside advisors to provide information related to the fiscal year end. This evening we have 4 items on the agenda. A quick review of the town's pension and OPEB funds, a review of the Board of Education fiscal year 2015 financial position, a review of the town side fiscal 15 year-end financial position, and to hear a report on the budget process from the Budget Subcommittee. That being said, we have several members missing tonight who had work commitments or work emergencies come up. They send their regrets at not being able to be here. With this, I'll turn it over. Any board members have any questions, comments, or concerns at this time? Seeing none, we'll go right to presentations. Mr. Vahey's here from the pension boards. Thanks for being here, Mr. Vahey. Appreciate it. And
My
if we
pleasure.
can turn to our documents, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. I think you got a few extras because I just was in front of the RTM committee meeting and made a presentation there, and I think they just gave the same packet. So there's, for your perusal, there's the investment policy statement, and I think there's also a summary of conflicts, of which there are none. And the IPS was not changed, but I should note that we actually just changed it a week ago, only to include OPEB officially, like it's got ranges and everything's in an appendix. So,
Is that included here? I didn't see that.
no, so that's the one that was in place at the end of the fiscal year, but we had made a decision to update that at our next meeting, which just happened to be the September meeting. So,
Can you, Mr. Mayor, can you make sure we get a copy of that forwarded to the board?
oh, is it? So it is the
Is
new
it?
one.
Okay,
There you
so
go.
is this the new one?
So we
Okay,
gave the
so
most
this is
recent
the
one.
new one. Okay, that's what I was asking. Okay.
And then the other documents are the performance reports dated June 30th.
Okay. Why don't we turn, does anybody have any questions, comments on the investment policy or guidelines at this point? Okay, seeing none, let's turn to the June reports from Callan.
As of June 30th, we were sitting on about 350 million in the main funds. And actually, given the market performance, I can tell you this, we actually are much closer to 350 than the 355. You'll see on the last page where it gives the returns for the fund. There's a 3% fund return for the fund for the year, which beat the benchmark by a little over 100 basis points, which was great. The performance was hindered by our exposure to commodities. It's not a very big exposure, but commodities got hammered, and foreign equities took a little bit of a beating in the past 12 months. And I can say that since then, we've had a little bit of a global downturn here in the past 6 weeks. So everything's kind of taken it on the chin a bit. But outperformers were real estate, and all of our managers across the board, I think with the exception of one equity manager, beat their. They provided alpha. They outperformed, which is what we like to see.
Questions? Okay, so on the return, we're looking at 3% over the last 12 months. On a rolling basis, that's going to come down even worse because of the last 3 months, correct?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but yes.
Okay.
I think it was actually zero. I think we actually had a zero return. Was the updated?
Zero in total for the year, for
Yeah.
the rolling 12
Yeah,
months.
rolling 12.
So the assumptions in our models for the pensions were closer to 7%, isn't that? Was it 7?
7.5,
Yeah, 7.5.
which are based on rolling 10-year periods. So, yeah, I would point you to the 36 and 60-month rolling averages.
Yeah, which also account for some of the downturn and stuff like that. But last year, we had what we would refer to as a good guy from a nice high rate of return last year that we're not going to have going into the next year, all things being equal.
Yeah, actually, 2011 was one of the highest returns ever in the S&P, I believe.
Right. So 11, and then last year we had a good chunk. Okay, let's turn to, if there's no other questions on that, can we turn to the asset allocation page? Please, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, last year was, I think, 16%, but how often does that happen, right? Over the past 10 years, where we've been, you said we kind of mark it on the 10 years, Brian? Do you know what that number is? I mean, I see 5 is 11, which is very good.
It's right around 8%, actually.
Is it? Okay, thank you.
I'm not talking about our fund. I'm talking about the S&P 500. I don't. We had that in our big, huge annual report back in January. What ours is over 10 years, but I don't have that at my fingertips. We could follow up and give that to you.
Bottom line, though, the last 12 months hasn't helped our average at all as we look forward for the next year.
No, but I honestly, I don't. It's like focusing on your 401k balance every week. It's not.
Right. No, I get the point. I'm just trying to look at, last year we had significant upside in our pension funds that helped us a lot, and we're not going to have that.
I mean, from your seat, I would be thinking more of the, the ARC, because
Yeah,
that's
exactly. The funding. Mr. Becker, go right ahead.
Yeah, no, and thank you. That was where I was heading. Yeah, I mean, I understand the lawn projection side of it, but last year we had a big spike and it in the right direction, which certainly helped us on the tax rate side within the budget. But looking at a number like this and looking at that still somewhat lofty actuarial assumption, it starts making me a little bit concerned now that we have the year-end numbers as to what's going to happen come budget season the next time. We're just not going to have that, and it may tick up a hair again. So certainly
yeah. It's currently smoothed over 5 years,
That's
too,
what-
so it's 1/5.
yeah, but
Okay.
still.
All right, any other questions on the returns? Can we look at the asset distribution then? So, go to page 1. Are there any questions on the asset distribution? Anyone? The one comment is, we're over in domestic equities by about 5%, under in some other areas. And in BlackRock, you've got almost 17%. Where's that stand now? Is it still that high?
Just because of where the market's been, I'm sure it's a little lower.
But there was no action taken by the board, that's just by the market?
That's the S&P 500 index. It's a market proxy. I think per that IPS in your hands, I think that could be as high as could be 2/3 of the high end of the range, which was what 34%. So I think it could be like 21% or something.
Yeah, and I'm not concerned about, I'm not questioning at all the investment policy there. I guess what surprised me, even though it is an S&P fund, et cetera, is the fact that we had such a high percentage, 17% in there. I thought we were trying to keep that with any one investment advisor a little bit lower, given what happened.
No,
in the
I
past.
gave you the two. I gave you the mandate, the 2/3. I mean, you're so the risk would be that BlackRock, as a registered investment
I'm not,
advisor at
right.
the SEC, is going to fail. I mean,
I think we've seen strange things happen there.
Well, yeah, and it would be bad for a lot of people considering they have several trillion under management.
Yeah,
but
no
anyway,
kidding. Okay. Any other questions?
And to the higher equity, it's because we draw from that S&P fund when we get capital calls on the private equity, which
Right.
we are getting them from Mesro finally, and Lexington's third fund. The Lexington's second fund is winding down.
Right. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, let's go to the OPEB side. Go right ahead.
It's very similar, just with a lot less choices, almost 25 million. Its return over the last 12 months, 2.3%, which is right in line with the benchmark.
Bless you.
Bless you. And it suffered a little bit more because it's a greater exposed to the foreign stock market.
Bless you. Okay, any other questions on this? You're well within your targets here. The return, like you said, is in line, sadly, but in line. Anything else?
Just that the discount rate here is 7.5%. That's our, is that our goal? Is that fair to say, Brian?
Actually, OPEB, last time I saw it did not have the same actuarial assumption.
It's 4.5.
4.5.
It's a different liability stream, and it has I don't know if it's not mandated, right?
We never actually fund the OPEB liability
New money.
from on the board side. So because of that, we use 4.5 on the.
Can we just check on that, Caitlin? I mean, I believe you. I don't think it says that in the, or does it in that book?
Yeah, it's actually in the CAFR.
Is that? Okay.
70. And because of there's an implicit rate subsidy, because the retirees pay 100% of the premium, subsidized partially by the current actives, because the healthcare costs for both actives and retirees are in the same bucket. And the rate is not age-sex rated.
Okay. Just what I'm reading in our annual financial report is town and police and fire 7.5%.
Correct,
Board of Ed 4.5%.
correct.
So, is it blended? Why are we saying
I'm sorry,
4.5%?
did you ask me about Board of Ed? What, maybe I was...
I was asking more, well, I was asking about the town. So the town's 7.5%.
Yes,
Oh yeah, those two.
Those are the same. Board of Ed's 4.5%.
Yeah, that's
Correct.
this one, the one we already went over. The first one, the joint fund. OPEB is different.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Mr. Spade.
Thank you.
Item number 2 is to review the Board of Education fiscal year 2015 year-end financial projections. Can the Board of Education come forward? Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Hi.
All right. Do you have anything you would like to address before we go right to Q&A?
We had a good year. Use the mic.
Okay, let's elaborate.
Well, I think we do want to point out that the board made a number of additional contributions into its health insurance account this year, by year end. That does show up on the medical retention fund balance sheet as well, but this was in addition to the $700,000 that we put in for the retirees, extra retirees. Then there was $160,000 that we put in because security funding that we were carrying in the operating budget was in fact bonded. And then on June 30th, we made an additional $500,000 transfer into the fund. And then the final end-of-year closing, which for us is 7/31, an additional $228,794 was transferred in there, leaving a balance of 51 cents in the operating budget. That's all reflected on the medical retention fund balance sheet, which obviously that additional contribution of $728,794 substantially strengthened our cash position and actually brought it back over and above where it was when we did the first budget of the year, and also keeps us in line, depending on how things play out this year, keeps us in line to meet our obligations for 15-16. So in total, we put in, how much, Doreen?
1.588
$1,588,000 change
from the board.
from the Board of Ed, additional on top of the existing budgeted number to shore up the balance sheet. And this was largely a function of, before somebody asks, where'd that money come from? The state of Connecticut, as Doreen explained to the board last week, we got a windfall in special education reimbursement this past fiscal year of about, what,
$764.
$764,000 above and beyond what we were projecting. And so basically took that money, and instead of doing something else with it, we basically took it and put it over in the medical retention to help that out. So that really is, all the other plussing and minusing that was going on near the end of the year, we really just netted out to close to zero. So we made a big commitment to put every spare nickel we could find into medical retention. And we did that. I guess we'll stop there.
Thank you. Do we have questions from board members? Mr. Walsh?
Dr. Tedder, can you explain how we had the windfall? What made up that windfall? Did it just fall out of the sky? Did we apply for it and we just didn't think we had a chance of getting it? What was the process that we got $764,000 more than we budgeted or knew we were getting, or even knew during the third quarter review that we were ever going to get?
Well, when the excess cost was filed in December 1st, in my second quarter report, I noted that there was an additional 22 students that were filed for in December. So, and that's a significant, increase. We still don't know at that point, though, what we're going to actually end up getting. In March, that number came down a little bit. I think they dropped by 3. But there were still an additional 22 students eligible. The second factor was that we had budgeted 75%. That had been about the percentage that we've been getting back from the state past few years. We ended up getting 80%. So between the two things, those two factors, that's where an additional 764 came from.
And what drives the percentage? The legislature?
So what happens is the state allocates a fixed sum for the whole state for excess cost. And then depending on what the claims are on the pot, determines the payout.
Okay.
So no one knows for sure what the payout's going to be. They estimate what they think it's going to be, and they give us guidance on that. So when we do our budget, in a given year, and you don't know that till, first of all, everyone files in March, but they don't turn it around in March and tell you what it is. If there are fewer claims on the money, then you get a higher percentage. More claims on the money, you get a lower percentage. It's a casino game. I mean, you just don't know. So, and then there's one more correction they make, and this actually benefited the town. They make another correction later, and then that money gets changed, and they look at it one more time at the very end of the year, and that money is either added to or subtracted from the education cost-sharing grant the following year. So it's a moving target with the state, but the legislature has a line item, and then it's, you claim it and take your chances.
Why didn't we think we were going to get money for the 22 additional students? Did we think we were going to get 0 for them? Why wouldn't we get anything for them?
I'm not sure what you mean. Why would we get?
You said that one of the reasons why, in addition to the percentage going up, is that there was 22 additional students that you saw that we were filing for in your December application. And that you tracked that and then it went down by 3, correct? Okay. Did you presume that we were going to get 0 for those 22 students? Were those 22 we just didn't know about when we did the budget last year?
Correct.
And did you, along the way when we saw we were going to get 22, did you think we were not going to get any money for those students? Or why didn't we get updated along the way that we saw this potential going to happen?
We can never count on what's going to happen between December 1st and March 1st.
Okay. So the number could go down from 22 to 0?
Anything could happen with special ed.
The other thing is, just because we file for it doesn't mean they're going to agree with the filing.
Okay.
So they will go in and look at it and say, you counted this cost and you shouldn't have, so this kid doesn't qualify anymore. Or you claim this kid, there's 2 different formulas going on here at the same time. And we've gotten into disputes with the state about this. Under one formula, the threshold above which you get reimbursed is 4.5 times the per pupil expenditure. Under another formula, it's 1 times. So if it's a state agency placement, that's the 1-time formula. If it's our placement, it's the 4.5 times. And sometimes it's not always clear whose placement it is. So we might file for the 1 time, right? The state may turn around and say, no, that's really your kid. You're only getting above 4.5 times. Well, that's a lot of money. That's 3.5 times our per pupil expenditure, 3.5 times 15,000. That happens 2 or 3 times, you're really in trouble. So that's another problem. They'll disqualify expenses, or they'll say you used the wrong threshold. It's just unknown, so you have to be conservative with it because we can't afford to be wrong.
So after the second quarter review, maybe we should ask how many additional or less plus or minus kids we've had to give us some sense of where this number's going. Because you'll know the application in December, correct?
Right.
So that should be a legitimate
And
question
I
we should
noted
ask
that.
after
I
the
noted that in
second.
our second quarter report.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just, you never know what's going to happen with it from there.
I was going to ask a follow-up question to Mr. Wells, if I might.
Sure.
So you've got that one toggle, which is the number of applicants you're going to apply for. Could this, I'm more concerned about the volatility of the number. So the volatility, this time we expected, we budgeted 75% of a certain number of kids. We got more kids, more students, and a higher percentage. Could it also work in the opposite way? Forget the kids for a second, but in terms of, forget the students for a second, but in terms of the percentage, instead of it being 75, could it have gone the opposite direction and been 70?
Yes.
Right, so that could have left a whole, in other words, we could have had a bad outcome sitting here saying, okay, we got the 22 more students, but we only got 70% of the reimbursement, therefore we're in the hole here, $400,000 or $500,000.
You don't know what other districts are filing for across the state.
Right.
All you know is what you're filing for. One thing about...
So you
Yep.
so you budget, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut off. I
Yeah,
just
we
wanted to
budget
clarify,
75%.
which is the historical percentage or the historical average that we get.
They actually will tell us that they know at the state, when they put the number in the budget, they know what percentage that's kind of based on.
So they have an
So they tell us, they'll
expectation.
say, this is about 75% of the historical average claims, and that's why we use that figure. But again, they don't know
could
what's coming
change,
in.
though?
Sure, it changes every year. They can't go over their number. They've got a budget, and it's just a fixed sum of money. They don't allocate it per town. They don't say Fairfield gets 2 million in the budget and somebody else gets 3 million. It's just, here's 138 million for the whole state, and then everybody, it's like a feeding frenzy. We all try to get our piece of the action, and then sometime
That sounds like
late
Shark
spring.
Week.
It's really, it's difficult. I mean, special ed is a very, very difficult expense to keep track of in a lot of ways, all through the year. You've seen it happen in a bad way. The scenario where, if we have students who exit the district, which doesn't seem to happen all that much, if they exit the district and they take with them a very expensive placement to another district, well, our special ed reimbursement will go down, but our expenses associated with that student go way down as well, so that will help our tuition account. So it's just very volatile. That's the only way to describe it.
Do you have other questions, Mr. Walsh?
With the 22 additional placements, did the expenses go up in certain areas dramatically for the 22? Because the revenue's gone up, but where are the expenses for the 22 students?
Excuse me, 19 of them were in district.
Okay.
Right.
So they could be costs that we already, teachers that were already here, it's just one more kid in the class.
Right. There could be a situation where, on paper, when we file with the state, we can claim the expense, but there's actually not a marginal expense to us for that student, or the marginal expense might be very small. So you could have a student who is just below the line, and for whatever reason needs some additional services. And we get to claim the amount above the additional services. We don't have to hire anybody to provide the services. Say it's speech therapy, and we already have a speech therapist.
Okay.
And that service is, I don't know, let's say that puts you over by $10,000. Just make up a number. We're not incurring any real cost to that, provided we can fit it into the speech therapist's schedule.
Yes.
But we file it with the state
Okay.
and get $7,500 back. And repeat that a bunch of times, and you can do pretty well. So what our staff is really good at, and I've never seen anybody do this as well as the people. It's the people right behind the magic door behind us who do this. They count every possible expense for students we're serving in district. A lot of districts, what they do is they kind of make an assumption that if we're serving a child in district, they'll never qualify for the excess cost provision. But if you really go into all the expenses of a given child, it could be that they will qualify even though you're servicing them in district. And we're very aggressive about that. And it's been confirmed, the auditors check it, so we're not, making an error. But that's something that, we're very aggressive about, and it's paid off.
Right. So both of these amounts, the 500,000 and the 228,787, where they're called residual balances. It's kind of a new term I've not heard you guys use before, so I just want to be clear about this. Both of those residual balances are from revenue line items directly tied to special education reimbursement.
I think that when it all boils down, that's the easiest way to explain it. I mean, we had other accounts that went up and down that kind of covered themselves.
Okay. Was there any effort done in central administration to realize that the internal service fund numbers weren't looking well and that you put spending holds in certain areas at all during the last 4 or 5 months of the year?
We didn't have a budget freeze. The schools were allowed to keep, spending their money the way they needed to.
Okay. All right. No more questions on that specific item.
So a couple of things here, just an observation. If I look at the budgeted amounts, the appropriate amount was $155,718,000 for last year, right? So if I look, the total here that was available and then given to the internal service fund was about 1.589, right? So really, we're at about a 1% differential between what was budgeted and what was spent by the Board of Education, right? With the difference going to the internal service fund. Fair statement?
Yes, that's correct. On top of course, this is the additional money you're talking about.
Well,
Because we obviously
Yeah.
budget,
What I'm basic, yeah, what I'm.
yeah,
what I'm
we
basically
budget a
coming
lot
down
more than
to
that, right?
Is the way you're, with a $156 million budget.
Right.
On a rounded basis, you really came within, you managed to within 1% of your budget.
That's correct.
Right, I'm trying to pay you a compliment, that's pretty darn good, actually. And you had kind of the teacher reserve, you had the windfall come in from the state. If you got rid of the windfall within the state, you were literally about half a percentage point
Right.
on the budget, right? But we're not going to look back and see that's because there was a whole lot of spending going on in June, right? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, no, I mean, that's the whole thing is, I mean, if, what we didn't do was say, hey, look, we made a good faith effort, we put the 860 in.
Right.
Oh, look at this money coming in from the state, let's go on a spending spree. That's not what happened.
Right.
Now, fortunately or unfortunately, I can't take credit or blame for that. I wasn't here. Doreen and the staff, this is part of the time when I was out, but there was no, and I don't think, quite honestly, I don't think I've gone on a spending spree since I've been here. You know, we've had experience here where we had a little bit of a windfall and we've turned it back either to the town, or we had the whole electricity thing one year, where the rates dropped right after the budget was done. Twig did a great job negotiating the rates, and then all of a sudden, we had $350,000, and we actually turned it back into the general fund. At that point, the internal service fund wasn't an issue.
Right.
So, you know, if we need it for an emergency, then that's different. And we've had emergencies where we've had to spend money that wasn't
Boilers of the
budgeted.
like and stuff like
Boilers, I mean, they come up every year, and we do our best to cover it within existing appropriations. We will not do something so we can do something else. I mean, we've gone through this a few times where we've had unanticipated expenses, but we try not to simply go out and spend it because it's there.
Right. Thank you. Follow-up question. So I'm looking at the schedule that's put together here, since we've been talking about the
Medical
Internal
retention?
Service Fund. Right, it's the medical retention. So you can't see it from here?
Yeah.
It's a medical retention. And I want to go over to columns 14 and 15, which is kind of the final, right? Factors everything in.
Yep.
And then kind of the projection for 2015, 2016. And one thing that jumps off the page, and others noted it, is that the, and we're kind of using our crystal ball to look into the future. In March, based on historical methods and the like, and the hocus pocus, our insurance advisors told us that for fiscal year 2016, right, which we're in the midst of now, our cost would be $31,533,857. Now, that was based on experience through March, correct? So now that number is exactly the same for the final projection, or for the most current projection for 2015, 2016. So my question is, why hasn't that been updated with more recent information?
We won't get an updated projection until October for the next budget season, for the budget season.
So why wouldn't we get it, I guess what I'm asking is, why don't, we basically get this quarterly. So the one we have in here is based on March. Why don't we have one based on June 30th experience, so that we can look going forward? Because right now, you know, the happy news is you had this windfall, right? And we're projecting out a balance now as of 6/30/2016 of $2,011,000, which is much better than the projection we thought it was going to be previously, right? But we've only updated one side of that equation. We've updated the side of the equation that says we're more flush, right? You've transferred money in. We haven't updated the side of the equation that says what is the projected expense for the year. So it's an incomplete equation, I guess. I feel like I'm back in math class.
Well, that's true, but also, if you look at the 14-15 numbers, which basically that's what this is built on,
Agreed.
from March to the final, if you look at that, columns 12 and 14, you can see that they had projected the 14-15 expenses to be 30,039,718. And the updated final was 30,016,916. So that's very close.
So you don't expect...
So
it-
we don't expect that if they were to do this up again, now,
Well, why didn't they do it as of
I don't
June
know.
30th?
They just don't usually, AN just doesn't do that.
We've never asked him to.
I don't know. We don't have that. I'm not worried about it, but we just don't do it.
You're talking about providing future year projections?
Yeah. Right,
We pay them to do that?
Yeah.
right. For June 30th, right?
What do you mean?
Or for every quarter?
Give me the exact question here.
Okay. Go to the Picasa, go to the last column.
Yes, sir.
Last column has an expense estimate projection for 15 to 16, 31,533, 857. See that number?
Correct.
It's the same number as it was in March. So it hasn't been updated for any experience. Now, to Dr. Title's point, which is a valid one, the projection that they used for 14-15 changed immaterially. Okay, I just want to make sure that we're getting what we're paying for. Did we get a projection for June 30th? See what I'm saying?
Yes, I would assume that the number, the 31,343, is the number that was approved in the budget, and that's the number that's there. That number could be updated and adjusted every year, but I'm not sure you'd want, or every quarter.
No, I'm
Actually,
sorry.
every month. But you wouldn't want to change the budget number.
No, we're on such a razor's edge with this, right? We thought we were actually going into a negative position, right? So we've been kind of tracking this thing quarterly to see where we are, right? All I'm saying is, has this been updated for the quarterly information? And it doesn't look like it has been. for June.
Not on this document, no, but that's,
That's,
that information's available.
that's my point.
Right.
So, but we have that information. Do you have that information tonight?
No, sir.
Okay. Can you get that to us
Sure.
sooner rather than later so that we know? Because this is something we're concerned of as a board, is what the net number is going to be, or the balance as of 6:30. See what I'm saying? This is the same thing we kind of go through every year at this point, where we're trying to gauge the crystal ball
Right.
for the coming budget season and understanding what pressure we're going to be under, right? And so the concerns right now, and I'm not going to raise a dramatic concern, but the concern is, number one, we looked at the pension returns and they're lower this year, so we're not going to have any upside there, right? Now we're looking at the IBNR here, and we're just trying, it's great that we have this good news and we've been able to put more money for us. That helps. The question is, what's our experience like? And is that going to be a bad guy? That's what I'm trying to get to. I don't know, is everybody following that?
Yeah, you're just asking for an update of the budget number.
Yeah.
Well, that's a, I'm jumping on this a little bit.
Yeah.
That's not a budget number.
No, it's an experience number.
Right.
Right.
Not for 15, 16.
Right, exactly. It's their projection,
Correct.
You know,
It's
which
an
would-
experience number based on
correct.
the
It's
past
the estimated
experience.
expenses,
Correct,
trended up from the last 12 months.
correct.
But given that the last
That's what
12...
we use to budget the next year.
Exactly, right,
Right?
right.
Because if all of a sudden they come back and say that number's 34,
correct.
we're sitting here saying, okay, we've got a budget hole that we've got to make up in 16, 17, and we're having unpleasant conversations in March. That's all.
Got it.
Does anybody else have?
We're having them in December, right.
Right, exactly.
On this document?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a number of
Go ahead.
questions. Column 5, the very first number where it says balance on July 1st, the 2,165,387. Why is that number, since we use an accrual basis, why is that a cash basis number when we use accrual basis in the town, and especially for the credit agencies? Why wouldn't that not be the 761,066? That's the bottom number in column 4.
I know, it's not changed yet.
Yeah.
Well, we we finish with our cash balance, and it becomes our cash balance at the beginning of next year.
Have you seen this document? I'll bring it over to you. This is what the town uses, okay?
Right.
Yep,
Which, you're familiar with this?
yep,
Do you notice how the town uses the accrual numbers?
yep.
And why is that?
I don't know, that's always been their method. This is what's been.
This is the method they use, I believe. Caitlin and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the method we use because this is what the credit agencies look at, correct? And this is the numbers that they want to see.
The million for the negative is what is in our annual report.
Our annual report, the CAFR, which is what the bonding agencies and everybody looks at, correct? Because they look at it on an accrual basis. They don't look at it on a cash basis, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So why do we do apples to oranges here when you guys give us these numbers on a cash basis? I mean, if you guys, my thought is, I guess, I find this document, as Tom calls it a Picasso, very difficult to read. And one of the reasons it's difficult to read is because when I try to tie it to the town's numbers, there's a lot of analysis that has to go into this on why those numbers are different. And I understand why you might have some internal purposes for why you're using a cash basis, but since we're using an accrual basis to do apples to apples on the internal service fund, I think for our purposes, and I'd like to have my other board members' opinions, why don't we just do a form for us that has the accrual basis in it from now on? Is there a problem doing that?
The numbers are right. I think the numbers are there. It's just a matter of how they're presented.
Yeah, but what I don't understand is why you're counting as income, the cash, when we are doing the accrual number. So when I look at the two internal service fund numbers, and especially when I take this one, which is the town document, which, Doreen, you just said you're familiar with, where we got risk management, total active medical, BOE medical, and then we come to a total. The very first number we always start out with is fund balance from the previous year, accrual basis. Could we get a form similar to this where instead of starting off with a cash balance, you start off with the accrual balance? Because to me, I'm dealing, as a member of the Board of Finance, I'm dealing with the town's books, the CAFR, and specifically what credit agencies are looking at. And to talk apples to apples, I think we should all be using, at least in this atmosphere. You might have another reason why you guys use a cash basis, and maybe you want to see that, but it really doesn't matter to me because I really need to see the accrual basis. So when we come to these quarterlies, it just would be easier, I think, if we had a document that was similar to the town so that when I'm looking at it, I can see how these numbers roll right up. And when I see, for example, on this year-end internal service fund where I look at BOE medical and it starts off with 761,066. But yet when I start up with yours, I'm finding, at least in the column 14, approximately 2 million. One says 2,311,066. One says 2,165,387 in column 5. Because it just seems, since we're dealing with an accrual basis, I don't know why we really care about the cash basis.
But the number is there, the bottom line.
I understand, but when it
Okay.
rolls up, we roll up a different number to the top than you roll up to the next year. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's dramatically different. It goes from 761, and you guys are starting off the year with 2,165,387 versus what we have on our forms for the towns for you, 761,066.
2 different years.
So I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but I find this form extremely difficult to use, and I don't know why we'd use the cash basis when the town is using really an accrual basis for the purposes that this board is using it for.
The bottom line, I think what you're saying, though, is the bottom line of this report is the net accrual basis.
That's correct.
Right.
Okay.
I think what happens is Bob and Caitlin can take this and convert it into the form that you're familiar with for your purposes. This form, this report goes back well before the two of us.
But it makes your numbers look better, actually. You
But
know why
then-
it makes your numbers look better? Because your income looks dramatically higher. Because you roll that cash in as though it's income, as opposed to the
But it's a
accrual
starting
number.
point. It's available for.
Well, I know, but
Right.
under the accrual basis, we're requiring you to have a reserve fund of this IBNR.
Right, but if you remember, the guidelines this year were on the cash basis.
Do no harm.
Correct. That was the do no harm rule. Okay? The do no harm rule was, we know you're not at 1 times the IBNR, so cover your expenses. Do no harm. Okay? So if you look at columns 6 and 7,
Yeah.
all right, down on there, there was a balance as of 6/30. It's the third line up from the bottom, 1,541,330. And then when I put the budget together for the board, we put enough in the operating budget to, based on the most current information, that we would still have 1,541,330 in the bank on that. Now, actually, because the IBNR goes up, you lose a little ground, but basically, we were looking at the cash basis. When the Board of Ed got the numbers, they basically did the same thing, by and large. It had dropped a bit, but again, it was do no harm. So the message I thought we had all agreed to, because this has been so contentious, was actually, let's look at the cash in there and make sure you cover your expenses. I think actually Bob said, well, this is like the first time in years they've actually covered their expenses. So everybody seemed pleased with the way we had budgeted. And in fact, we're now finishing the year with $500,000 more in cash than way back in the beginning when things looked really bad in March. It looked like we were going to go, way down. So we have been looking at and basing our budget on the cash. And this form has been in use well before my time. So if we want to change how we're doing this, I'm sure we're open to it, but people have kind of gotten used to it. So, we're open to working with the town any way, shape, or form to put the numbers together. We're not trying to look better or worse. We just want it to be honest.
I just find that I find the two forms confusing to look next to each other, and I think it really just overstates the income, to be quite honest with you.
It'd be an easy adjustment.
Maybe this should be referred to the reports committee, and we'll just decide what we're going to do and make a recommendation to the board.
Mr. Mayor, you had something you wanted to say?
Well, it would not be difficult to have something very similar to this. That, like, for example, our top number is the 761, right, which is the beginning balance. And on the Board of Ed number, that number is there, but you have to go back to column 4. So I agree with Jim. It's a little bit difficult to follow this form if you're not used to it. Since, sometimes I have to relearn it every quarter almost a little bit. But it would not be difficult to
Coordinate the
change,
two
to
forms.
coordinate, yeah, good word, to just change the beginning balance, make the beginning balance the actual accrual balance, and make some adjustments, and still have the multiple columns which give you all the various updates.
Can you guys just work on the consistency of them? That's fine. The information is all here. It is in an inconsistent format. I get it. So if we can have a consistent format, that's fine.
It's fine. It's not going to change the substance of what's on here.
Right.
If it can be, I will admit, coming into this position, I'd never seen this form before in my life. This was a creation of somebody who, basically, I think was, I understand in some towns, health insurance doesn't get the scrutiny that it does here in terms of how did you get to that number in the budget? Back to my last 2 districts, it was, we sat down with someone at the town, and they said, here's the number you need to put in there. We put the number in there, and everybody was happy with it. Well, needless to say, here, that doesn't work so well. So everybody needs to see an exact accounting of, what's your trend, what's your expenses, what What's your beginning balance? What are your assumptions? What's your operating budget? What's in your way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so as a result, I think that my predecessors felt they had to put down every dollar that went into the calculation so they could stand in front of the Board of Ed and say, we're recommending that you put the number into the budget, and here's how I arrived at it. So I think it's really for the purposes of the board feeling comfortable that it's putting in the right number, and then if the same set of questions come up with the other bodies, it's all in there. So this was new to me, too, and hard to comprehend. Now that I've got it, it's fine, but it's more, it may be more of an internal document for our purpose than for your purpose.
I think it's I think there's three things that drive
Yeah.
it, right? To your point, there's three things that drive that level of scrutiny, at least from this board, right? Number one, the fact that we're all playing in the same sandbox, right? Number two, the fact that the sandbox isn't that big as it relates to our margin for error. And number three, that through the years, we've had these vast fluctuations. First, it was the town side, and now it's the Board of Ed side. So you have those three things in combination, plus the fact that we're self-insured, right, makes it very difficult and puts us extra level of scrutiny on there. So
Yeah, I don't mind the
fact of
scrutiny. I
that-
think it just explains why it's so
Yeah.
complicated.
The fact of the matter is, with the exception of not having the updated figure for what we believe our expenses are going to be in 2016 based on the latest trends, right? This is good news.
Right.
We've added to the internal service fund. We've got this extra $1.5 million. That's all good news. Let's not obfuscate the good news with, the concerns that we have. So, thank you for that. And I do think we do need to recognize the fact that you turned over that windfall, exactly as we had hoped, to the internal service fund. And I appreciate that.
Thank you. Who else?
Mr. Becker? Oh.
If I can, we are one town, and I'm proud of the fact that our Board of Education members recognize that. And while it may be tempting for some board members to say, well, we have some extra money, let's spend it here, the board does recognize that we have a responsibility to build the balance sheet side of our medical retention fund. So this is, I think, a mutual goal that both the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Education have.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Becker? Thank you, Mr. Dwyer.
Just quickly, if that amended new version of the form, since this current report pertains to the end of the year and these questions have come up projecting out, if we could just get that as a follow-up from this meeting, this new version with these numbers, if you could do that.
Well, I think
Instead of waiting till the
you have
next
the
time.
information in this document.
So just,
For what you need. That this has the information, on the Board of Ed column is
Yeah.
just what you're asking for. It's just, I don't think you need it just in this document, because you have the information already here.
it's fine.
The only other comment I would
Be easier.
make is that you, as the Board of Finance, understand your form and the accrual basis.
Yeah.
Don't forget, my audience is, I'm doing this for the Board of Education, and that's, they're not necessarily, please don't make me explain accrual basis to the Board of Education.
Yeah, that's very appropriate. That's a very appropriate comment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You can come in and explain it to them, Tom.
Yeah.
It may be which
We
board,
have, actually.
which board is it easier to educate about the change of form?
No, thank you for that. Okay, go right ahead, Mr. Walsh, please ask the question.
Between columns 4 and 5, the top, 5 and 6, excuse me, the top number, the balance number, why does that change from 2,165,000 to 2,311,000 and then carry through? Because that's about $146,000.
Comes from here. Goes there.
You're looking at column 5 and what else?
If you look at column 5
5
and
to 6.
5 was the budget, and then 6, and every month after there, it changes, it goes up by $146,000.
Well, because one's the budget and one's actual.
So the actual, when did we learned of the actual, starting in November?
Well, the actual is the ending balance from the
From June
from
30th?
column 4. The 2311?
Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. Yep, now I got that. Okay.
He wasn't lying that the form confused him.
It is.
No, it is.
Because remember, the 14-15 budget is done before the 13-14
Yeah.
year ends, and that's what the difference is.
Okay, and the other question is, and I sent an email to both of you, so I'd like to discuss that, and just so the board knows if you want to see the email. Your memo that you sent to us in our packet, the one that's dated September 18th, the one that is subject matter 2014-2015 year-end medical retention fund before IBNR. Second sentence in that says, the June 30th, 15 IBNR actuarial calculation has not yet been received. Consequently, the spreadsheet will be updated with the final numbers by September 30th when it is received. So your numbers were put together without the IBNR from Aon. And I asked you today in my email about some questions about, has Aon not provided you with the IBNR calculation to date? Because usually they've supplied it by now. If they have provided it, what was the date they provided it? Because your memo's dated September 18th. Did Aon know that they needed this figure by our quarterly review date? And if it has been provided, will you recalculate your spreadsheet and provide it by tonight's meeting? And you responded that Aon knew we wanted the IBNR ASAP in September, as soon as possible, but apparently they had difficulty getting the lag reports. We did not have the IBNR on 9/18, but you subsequently did get it a week ago on September 22nd. But you have questions and feel further discussion, I guess, is warranted with Aon. What are these further discussions? Because from what I understand, this whole Aon thing, it's not just like one guy prepares it, right? It's like an actuary prepares it. There's probably like a peer review that goes on, goes all the way through before it's released, correct? But what's our discussions and why won't you guys update this prior to tonight?
I just asked them to validate the number because it's $309,000 difference from our calculation, and we base it on the increase in the claims. And it just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, and they haven't responded in a week?
No, we had a hard time getting in contact with each other initially, and then we had a brief discussion, but we've had follow-up and...
Okay, because I got concerned then, based on your memo, that maybe the town's numbers were wrong too, that the town hadn't been provided, but Mr. Mayor was good enough to say that he had received it on the same date, the 22nd, and that the town's numbers have their current IBNR number, the exact one that Aon supplied them when they supplied the Board of Eds.
And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I question their calculation.
Their actuarial calculation? You question their actuaries and their, what they did?
I would like a better explanation for why it's so far off from what we calculated.
Well, I would like, since you're not prepared to have that number, I guess, correct?
I have the number that they gave us. It's $2,060,000.
$2,060,000. What does that do to the internal service fund for BOE Medical?
It puts us right in line. We're about 20,000 off. We have 2,000, almost 40. They have 2,060 is cash balance.
2 million.
Why don't we,
I mean,
why
2
don't we
million.
go through your form and you tell me what numbers would change?
Our cash balance is $2,040,000, roughly.
The cash balance, and this is in line.
In yellow, column 14.
We don't get yellow. Because we don't get color, we don't have color printers for our stuff.
Third
So,
row, third number from the bottom.
Column, I think she's in column 14 right now, correct?
Correct.
2000, so the third number from the bottom is 2,040,000.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 2,038,665.
Okay.
Our number's the $1,750,000.
Yep.
Their number's $2,060,000.
2,060,000. Okay, so that's about $310,000 more?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the issue is this, that they were giving us an IBNR back when the expenses were roughly the same as they are right now, and the IBNR number jumped up $300,000. We just want to make sure they didn't make a mistake somewhere.
All right.
The other issue is that we were very concerned, and I think I don't know who I said this to, but because we were presenting this to the Board of Ed, a set of documents that look just like this, with the estimated number in there, we didn't want to then present different numbers to you than we had presented to the Board of Ed. So once we've got it set, we can issue new documents to everybody, because we went over this with the Board of Ed on the 24th? 24th. So that's the only piece that we didn't want to be giving you different documents than we gave them.
But if you had more accurate numbers than when you presented to them, why wouldn't you just present us with the most
We
accurate
didn't at that
numbers?
point. We had a number, but at that point, we had no discussion with them. This thing just sort of came out of the blue. So we gave them this number with, we don't know what the IBNR is.
All right, well,
I think we've kind of faced this question from time to time. It's always difficult when our board is given one set of numbers, and then we give a different set of numbers to another board, and then get a call, well, why didn't we know? Why didn't you send us something? Why didn't we know before you submitted something to another town body? And so out of respect for our board, we do try and coordinate so that we send to our board the same report that we send to you.
okay, well then maybe if, since we had this meeting set for 6 months or so, maybe you guys should schedule a meeting like the night before us, and then we'll have
Yeah,
the meeting.
no, our meetings are set a year in advance.
Okay.
You know, so.
But, all right.
Well, yeah,
When-
but that doesn't even, in all fairness, right? The bottom line is, we should get best available information, regardless. And each board, I understand the conundrum you're in, but it's very easy to say, it's very easy for the administration to say to the Board of Education, we're providing you best available information, this will be updated. And it's very easy for the administration to then say, by the way, we just got the IBNR in, and the IBNR is XYZ, we're going to disclose this to the Board of Finance because it came in after our meeting. Now, in this instance, you've got questions about it, and I understand that, right? I'm not saying you should in any way, shape, or form take their number without questioning it. But the reality is, you do have the number now, and to say, well, we're not going to discuss it with you because we haven't discussed it with the Board of Ed.
Well, we are discussing with you.
Well, we are now, but only because he asked the
Right,
question.
right.
If Mr. Walsh hadn't asked this question, I guarantee you this discussion wouldn't be happening, right?
Well, if somebody had asked it tonight at the table, we'd
Right,
talk
but
about it
we'd have
verbally.
that,
I just hate to have documents floating around
But
that are different from one to the next.
I understand that, but it's best available information.
Right, no, I get the point.
You know.
Look, I mean, it would be a lot easier
It-
if.
It's going to be a lot worse conversation if it's in December and all of a sudden we see a number that's a
Right.
hell of a lot worse.
It is
Instead of,
it's
oh,
an-
by the way, we didn't talk to you about it
Right.
because we hadn't disclosed it to anybody else.
Right. It's an oddity. It's really an oddity to come out of an IBNR number that's, with no change in experience, that's $300,000 higher.
That I understand.
Yeah, I mean,
understand
that's, so
that
it just
point, but
raises
I'm not-
questions for us to do some due
I ju-
diligence.
I'm not arguing that point.
Yeah.
I'm more following up on the point about when you're going to disclose that number, particularly if it's bad news. And, you know, bad
Right.
news isn't like wine, it doesn't get better with age. So to sit here and say, well, we weren't going to tell you about the bad news because we hadn't told the other guys first, because we got it after we spoke to them, might put us in the hole.
I want to clarify, because I don't think that's exactly what we're saying.
Okay.
We're saying that our Director of Finance has a question on the number. So before they send something to you based on a number that she has a question on, she's going to clarify that number, and then once she clarifies that number, we'll get a report and you'll get a report at the same time.
And that's legitimate.
Yeah.
and we should be able to have you back and
that-
ask a question about that, right, Phil? So we should maybe
We-
schedule that for a
we
future Board of
always-
Finance meeting.
We always come back to any Board of Finance meeting that
Okay.
you invite us to.
Do you think you'll have it by our next Board of Finance meeting, which is October 6th? Will you have this all cleared up and be able to ask Aon these questions, and you think they'll be responsive by that day?
I would hope so, yep.
Okay, so why don't we tentatively put them on for October 6th, and we'll update the form, and we can ask questions to you about it.
Can we make a note of that, Mr. Mayor, please? And does that night work
Board
for
of
you
Ed
guys?
meeting night.
Yeah.
We have a Board of Ed meeting that night.
Great.
Okay.
I also should say that, I mean, the IBNR is a number, you know, and I guess
Can we
we've
just
been.
get the updated schedule then?
Yeah,
If the
that-
number changed.
we'll get that.
Get us the updated schedule.
And we'll go from
What we'll do
there.
is we'll look at that schedule, and then we'll pick a date certain. It might be the next meeting where we can discuss that. Does that work?
That works.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thanks.
I think we do have an expectation at our table, though, that when there's information that's available, that comes in, even if it came in a week ago, even if it was after the 18th and came in on the 22nd, that we have a general expectation, and Mr. Mayor knows this and follows this, that we get updated on that. It doesn't just hang out, it just doesn't hang out
Right.
there.
If we were
should-
fully confident in the
we
number,
should-
had
we
no
shouldn't-
questions about it, we would have done it.
We shouldn't have to search that out.
Right.
We should be told that the number came in and that you have questions, and that should have been a voluntary thing. Thank you.
I understand it. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm thanking everybody. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this? Does anybody have any comments on the other numbers in the Board of Education budget before we let them go? We spent a lot of time on the internal service fund. I do have a question for you guys. So going into this fiscal year, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. You had so many retirements that you knew about. How many did we include in the budget? Do you remember?
We had, we included 14 in the budget, we have 22.
Okay, so you also, so now you have some
Right.
upside this year already.
Yeah, except for, at the same time, we had some enrollment changes and shifts in different schools, and we had to hire some additional teachers.
So what's the net impact?
So the net impact, we're still sorting out. That'll be in the first quarter report, which is going to close tomorrow, because we had some move-ins in elementary schools that caused us to have to add a section. They went over the 25 limit, and we had to split them. And so we think the whole thing will probably wash out, you know, at the end of the day, but there's no windfall in the personnel account this year. Just how it looks right now, but, you know, first quarter report will have that in much more detail.
Does that mean your enrollment's changed?
What happened was, the overall enrollment didn't change a whole lot. It just so happened that where the kids moved in and where the kids moved out, sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't. It's a little bit like medical. Where they happened to move in, we were very close to needing to hire another teacher, and that's where they went. And when kids left, they didn't leave the schools where if someone had left, we could have collapsed the section. So we had, 2 or 3 classes at Dwight School where we had 2 sections, and they were both right on the max. All it takes is 5 or 6 kids moving in. Dwight got a bump in enrollment. I think we hired 3 more teachers at Dwight. So North Stratfield. So it's all how they fall. You know, if you've got 2 25s in a grade and kids move in there, you're stuck. If you got 2 20s in the grade and kids move in, it doesn't cost you anything. So this year ended up hiring teachers, which I think is going to net fairly close to the savings from the retirees. So I don't see any, right now, I don't see any
It's early in the school
savings.
year, so we don't have any other surprises at this point in time.
No, at this point, we don't. I mean, there've been some, surprises at this point in the year are better than surprises later in the year. So we have had some surprises on the capital project side, not the capital non-recurring side. The hot water heater at Ward died. No one knew that was coming, and we weren't planning to do it. But it's early enough in the year that we can hold on some other projects, get that done, and then, handle it. Better than that happening in May. So there are always surprises, but we're managing them.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Are there other questions, comments from board members?
The only other question, I have no questions on this, but we have a projected net estimate variance form, that there's 2 items that seem to be addressed to the Board of Education that, while they're here, we should probably address.
Go for it, Mr. Walsh.
The first is on private school transportation. It seemed as though the variance was $48,000 to the worse, negative $48,000. Could you tell us why that was over in that account?
Town account.
It's a town account, but you guys manage that account, correct? Transportation? School transportation, private school
I
transportation?
can't answer that right now.
Okay.
It may be that they had to add a bus or tier to a private school somewhere. That's usually what will drive it.
All right, if
I
you can
just
prepare a
don't
memo
know.
to us on that?
No.
I think we did, had a bus last year.
Well, could you just get the answer and prepare a memo for us?
Okay.
We're supposed to be asking questions in regards to this variance report, and that although the private school transportation is paid for on the town side, it's your busing people, I guess, transportation people who manage that. So I'd just like to know the reason why.
No problem.
Also, there's a BOE line, which is actually, what Tom would call a good guy, by $14,000. Do you know what that's about?
When you guys close out your year, you transfer the expenses over to our side, and there was a $14,000 favorable variance between your budget and your actuals. Normally, it's prior year POs or some closeouts.
Okay.
That's it?
Well, I guess you could address that in the memo, too, since I don't know what it is.
Any other questions for the Board of Education? Seeing none. Thank you very much for coming out
Okay,
tonight.
thank you for having us.
All right, can we, I'm going to ask for a 5-minute break, and then we'll go into the town side. All right? Thank you. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're on. The third item on the agenda is to review the town's year-end financial position for fiscal year 2015. So I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Mayor and Ms. Bossy to go through the results of the fiscal year unaudited as they now stand, correct?
Correct.
Go right ahead and please direct us to which papers you would like us to look at. And by the way, I will remind the board, we've gone through 3 quarterly
to you.
reviews as it
can
relates to this fiscal year end. So while I'm sure we don't remember everything from those quarterly reviews, a lot of these variances we've already discussed, right? So I would ask you to just pick out the highlights or differences from prior quarterly reviews, if you wouldn't mind, in your analysis.
I'll start out and turn it over to the person who really knows the numbers. And I'll address the big picture, bottom line, estimated net surplus, $3 million. $500,000 of that $3 million is the budgeted contribution to surplus, so the actual net favorable variance, expenses and revenues is $2.5 million. $2.5 million shows up $2.3 million on the revenue side, and $200,000 on favorable on the expense side.
Mr. Mayor, what does this do, if these numbers don't change as a result of audit, what does this do as a fund balance as a percentage, just so we know?
Yeah, Ms. Bossy foresaw that question and put together a schedule. That will increase that would increase the percentage, the fund balance percent ratio to about 8.4%.
8.4 or 8.04?
Decimal 4.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Going to the revenue, the big one, I'm just going to address a couple, and I'll turn it to Caitlin. The big one, the tax levy, $1.8 million favorable. That's a result of 3 factors. If I could find my notes, I could read it, but about $400,000 is favorable, favorable variance, favorable to the town variance on the senior tax credit budgeted item, and 180,000 on increased taxes on the current year taxes. Our percentage collection rate that the Board of Finance set last year turned out to be extremely close. Now, if you remember when we reported this, to address your question, Mr. Chair, what's changed from the third quarter?
Yep.
If you remember, that number in the third quarter was about $500,000, because at that time, we had about a 25 basis point difference between the third quarter year-to-date collections this year, the fiscal year 15 versus fiscal year 14. Because of that concern, we got very aggressive in our collection efforts and sending out delinquent notices, et cetera, which boosted our prior year collections to a favorable variance of $732,000, and the interest on delinquent taxes to $491,000. So recapping those numbers, $400,000 favorable senior tax credits, $180,000 favorable on current collection, $730,000 favorable on prior year, and $591,000 favorable on the interest on delinquent taxes. The second item I'm going to address is the interest income. The interest income at year end, at the end of the third quarter, showed that as a potential forecast negative of $100,000. You can see on here it's $354,000. The 5-year bond rate, which we are closely aligned with in our investments, is went from 1140 to about 180, having a negative impact on our investments. The bond rates, June 30, have gone back up, and actually our year-to-date return, mark-to-market year-to-date, not today, but yesterday's year-to-date, were favorable this fiscal year, $427,000. So that has reversed itself. So those are the two issues I wanted to address directly, and turn it over to Ms. Bossy.
Going down the list, a lot of these are the same ones that were already spoken about in the third quarter. Clearly, the variance on the conveyance and the building permits has been favorable, as we've been discussing kind of all year. The police parking ticket revenue, I think we were forecasting around a negative 100 or so. That came in at a negative 125. The budget's been reduced subsequently in fiscal 16. State revenue is a favorable 170, close to what we've been kind of discussing. Conservation, again, I think as a result of the economy, is up slightly. Park and Rec revenue, majority is Penfield. Solid waste and recycling has a negative due to lower tonnage, but on the flip side, they're under on their expenses as well, around 300 as well. So those two always seem to kind of offset each other. And we've clearly spoken about the business interruption insurance and the transfer from discontinued projects over the past couple quarters. So that is summarizing our favorable 2-3 on the revenue side.
So the big swings here, really, of the 2.3 million, is 300K of insurance and $1.3 million related to prior year and interest. So 1.6 of the 2.3 relate to those three items, and then there's all sorts of in and outs on the other things.
Correct.
Right. Did we remind us real quickly, what did we do? Did we do something different this year on prior year collections? I just can't recall. I know we've talked about this item before.
When we got concerned when we were looking at what we do, one of the reports we have is, as I'm sure you've seen, is where we look at all the numbers on a year-to-date basis, the collection percentage rate compared to the prior years, and we basically look at that. We have that now for like 3 or 4 years.
Right.
And we look at that. We look at it by component.
Right.
And we kind of address, and we got concerned this last year because, like I said, we were like 25 to maybe even 27 basis points down when we're going in, because we do it monthly. We don't just do it quarterly. We look at that every month. And so Cinda and I, we got together, and I put together a plan, and mostly her work, right, obviously, where we got very aggressive and sent out, more aggressive with our delinquent collection efforts than we normally would have.
Including the interest on the delinquent.
The interest follows. Remember, it's 18%.
Right.
It's nice. I mean, it's kind of nice that people don't pay their taxes. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But it's money in the bank.
Okay. But it's not I guess what I'm trying to get to, this isn't repeatable for this next year because you've already done a substantial effort to clean it up. Is
Yeah.
that fair? Because we've done this in the past, but it seems to go in a cycle like we can do it every couple of years and get a pop. But obviously,
We can always squeeze more, but we got aggressive.
There's things like tax liens, tax sales.
Exactly. But they only come up every so often.
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you.
While we're on that one item,
Yeah.
so does that mean that interest on tax levies should be going down in the next year because we've now brought in a bunch of money that we would have been collecting interest on?
I think that our budgeted number for fiscal year 16 are still solid.
Okay.
Because we started looking at this in the second, or the third quarter,
Okay.
so when we're doing the budget. So we were aware of what was going on from a collection perspective at that time, while we were building the budget and looking at the numbers.
Okay. Mr. Walsh, anything?
That's it on that item.
Okay. Please continue. Thanks. I'm sorry for the interruption.
Okay, turning it over to the expense piece. Do you want to speak to the first item? That's new.
All right, I'll take two of them. Basically, the first item is, I don't know what's actually titled, the year-end payroll and contract accrual adjustment. As we all know, we accrue wages through June 30th. We review that calculation at the end of every year, and we look at all our contractual issues and compare that to what we have in reserve, and we did a little strengthening.
So bottom line is the union contracts we're settling are settling for more than we anticipated that they would settle for.
We did strengthening.
Strengthen? What's your definition of strengthen?
We beefed up the reserves. We have room to do so. I think, and you got to remember that the total contract is a combination of wages, ARC, healthcare, all those other things. So you can give a little bit on the wages, you take, but you get it back on the ARC. So that won't show up in here. The wages shows up in here, but the savings on the pension plans, the savings on the OPEB does not, and the healthcare insurance does not show up in here.
That'll show up there in the budget years that they're in.
It'll show up in those,
Internal service.
right, internal service fund and in the pension plan.
So what this is implying is that we were under accrued on the wage side, but there's somewhere in the internal service fund that makes some of this up. relative
And the
to
pension
union
plan, correct.
contracts.
Yeah, net, we're fine.
Can we, in private executive session at some point, see an analysis of that?
Sure.
Like that would be appropriate. Okay? Mr. Becker?
Yeah, obviously private executive for the details going behind it, but do we have an idea of what the overall encumbered amount across all the years that's still lingering out there? I know there's been a lot of settlements of the contracts which probably cleaned a lot of that up, but there's a fair amount just sort of sitting there encumbered across a number of years still, isn't there?
It's sitting on the balance sheet in accrued salaries for any years that the contracts are now open for.
Do we know what the total change, or can we just do that as a follow-up since?
Yeah, it's part of
Can
the
you
overall
pull-
contingency amount.
Because there's only two contracts that are, or three contracts that are up to date, there's still four that are currently open.
Okay.
And I might have that number in this stack of papers, but I don't think I grabbed it when I left the office.
Certainly email it.
Mr. Mayor, before the,
It's fine.
before we start the budget cycle, I think we should get to Mr. Becker's point and to my comment about private executive session. We should probably get a rundown of where that stands so that we understand exactly what's available, what's set aside. We're just trying to do this in the context of open contracts, negotiations, and
Yeah.
I think it's entirely appropriate for us to keep this in private executive session until such time as everything's settled.
It's fine.
I think the balance is about 1.2 mil.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's
That's a total in the contingency?
Total in the,
kind of just out.
total the answer to his question.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And then, yeah, I agree. Yeah,
His
thank you.
being Mr. Becker's.
Any other questions on this item for now? Seeing none, go right ahead, Mrs. Boss.
Moving down the line, these are some familiar
Yep.
kind of headings that we've seen over the last couple quarters. The unemployment comp we knew was going to be running over. Heart and hypertension, on the flip side, is a favorable. The solid waste and recycling is the flip side to the revenue piece I just mentioned. Public work ops, that got a little bit more unfavorable from the third quarter. Clearly, you guys, we've been talking about the snow for, the past 9 months or so. On the third quarter, we thought it was going to be around a 525 number. It's gotten slightly worse. Primarily, the two buckets are the snow and some utility costs.
Utility costs, what happened there? Did we have a budget error, or what happened?
There was an electric that I think Joe Michelangelo might want to breeze over real quick.
It's like $300,000 off.
Yeah. Hello?
Hello, Joe. Good evening, Joe Michelangelo, Director of Public Works. And yes, there was an error in the preparation of the budget, which was reflected in that overage. And when we build the electric budget for Public Works, which is basically all our town buildings, there are 4 components, which I'll just briefly, which is the transmission and distribution, which is just a straight rate you pay UI, the generation, which we typically do not buy from UI. We go on the market through various different sources. So last fiscal year, the first 6 years, were tied up in a contract, and that expired December 31st. For the next 3 months, because we did not lock in, we went with a market-type price, and then we did lock in for the last 3 months, so that's fixed and continues to be fixed. And that's done through the purchasing agent and Mr. Bowman, and they spend some time and they make good decisions doing that. Other factor in building our bid is our various power purchase agreements for solar arrays around town. And the way that works is we purchase power on a below market rate, and it costs us less than we pay for transmission and generation total. So that was slightly off because in our proposal, when we started the year, there was 3 such projects at below market rates. During the year, we actually had 3 projects join, so there are now a total of 5 town buildings that have these solars, excluding the school. So we're buying 5 of those buildings at below market rate. We had projected, we have 7 more in the queue. We had projected that some of them would come on earlier, so there was some assumptions on the solar that did not materialize as quickly, so we're buying more power at regular rates than the discounted rates. And the last component of it, which factors into the overage more, is there are a number of projects we have at 0% loans for UI. There's 13 such projects, which are various terms from 36 months to 48 months, depending on how they're crafted. And the theory behind those projects, and it does work, is that when you invest in a project, UI gives you a 0% loan, and the money you pay for that loan will supplement your electric bill. So if you pay $100 a month, you enter this program, it reduces it to $80, you pay the $20 a month to pay off the capital, and after you pay it off 3 years or 4 years, that's when you start realizing the
So
basis.
where was the budget error?
The biggest budget error, and the first three are, variable, but they came in pretty close. So the biggest budget error was in the calculation of the amount we would have to pay in the power purchase agreement. So we subtracted it in all the other factors where we would not be using those kilowatts and we would not pay for that generation, but we did not properly account for it in the amount that we would pay back on these various loans.
So was it a rate error?
It's not a rate error. These get added to your bill, but for each project, there's a monthly fee.
So what, we did more projects, we didn't account for them, so we took the
Well-
savings and didn't take the,
Correct. And once again, I'd say we didn't account for them, numerically when we prepared the budget. So our
is that fixed in the go-forward budget?
we were reviewing it after this came up. I think it's these four components. I think they're much more accurate going forward, but we'll report to that as we progress along the year.
Doesn't sound confident. Did you have a question?
No,
Mr. Walsh, do you have your hand up?
No.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody?
And just, in summary, obviously it's not an error we like to make, but but there was no lost opportunity or additional cost to the town. We did not capture it properly, no doubt, but we didn't,
So
lose
you
or
still
waste
believe
money.
in the program, you're just saying we screwed up the budget for it?
Correct.
We counted the savings, we didn't count the cost, the net offset is there, but you screwed up the budget, only recording the savings, not the incremental cost incurred.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay.
The remainder of the list on your sheet is the other smaller departmental variances, and how they preliminarily unaudited ended up for June 30.
Debt service, is that because of refinance activities?
Yes.
What was the fire for?
Fire was a capital item from fiscal
what?
14 that
Go 14?
we needed to expense in 15.
Why is that?
Why is that?
It was budgeted, and the fire department gave back the capital. It was unspent because it hit a grant account. It should have hit their operating budget, so we have subsequently transferred it over. So as a result, fire gave back to surplus about $60,000 or $70,000 in their capital account in fiscal 14.
That didn't really come back.
So did they give it back? You said they gave it back in
It's now being
14.
expensed in 15, which is why it looks like they're over budget in 15.
But you said they gave it back in
It was,
14.
It fell to equity in 14 to the
So
surplus.
we got it really, it just didn't get spent.
It's a
It's a
timing.
wash.
It's a
Timing issue,
timing.
yeah.
Timing issue or an accounting, for lack of a better word, accounting error?
It fell to surplus in 14.
Because it was charged inappropriately to a grant in 14?
It went to not the general fund, and so subsequently, we
So
found it.
now you had to
and
move
now
it
we
back
moved
into
it.
the general fund?
Yes.
So it was an accounting error? Right, I mean, that's what it sounds like.
About a recordation error.
Okay. I'm not trying to play a game of gotcha, I'm just trying to understand what happened. Okay.
Having fun.
So information technology, we transferred the funds and then not everything was spent, is that correct?
We tr-
Correct.
Any other questions on other department? What's Park and Recreation for 91,000? I don't remember that one.
A lot of it is Penfield. You see the revenue coming in negative up, and then you're favorable on the expense side.
Got it, okay. So the net is expenses for the town were within $197,000 of what we thought they would be, adjusting for a payroll/contract issue, and then your revenue was 2.3 million better.
Basically driving our positive surplus, plus the 500 budgeted.
Right. Any other questions, comments, concerns on the town side? Mr. Mayor, any surprises that came out during the year-end close, or Ms. Bossy, anything you want to highlight to us so far? Any areas of concern?
No, I think really we've been tracking all these big items all year, so,
I do too.
I mean, there hasn't really been anything. The electricity was a little bit, but, you know, we knew the snow was there, so it just made Public Works look a little bit worse.
Any other issues that, as you were doing this, Mr. Michelangelo found the issue on the electricity side? Are there any other issues in the closing that carry over and give us problems for 2016?
No. Just, the direct answer to that question you asked there, the loan debt area has carried over to 16.
I'm sorry?
The UI loan debt
Okay.
has carried over to 16.
Anything else?
Nothing else.
Mr. Walsh?
Number one, I want to thank the Finance Department for keeping track of everything, because I think we were updated with like 90% of this stuff prior to tonight, so it tracked pretty well to what the actual ended up being. The one issue that Mr. Mayor brought up, I guess that Ms. Bossy helped calculate, was that 8.4% fund balance estimate, and I'll keep that out there as an estimate, since these numbers as presented are estimates, this surplus as it is, and I guess this won't become final until our auditors go through everything and whatever. But based on where this is tracking and our fund balance being at 8.4%, the Fund Balance Committee, as we all know, wanted the, we had talked about it before, this body had wanted the, I guess the low range of the fund balance to be 8% originally, and we had compromised to a lower amount in order to be in compliance with our own policy at that point in time. But we had talked about that if we ever got up to 8%, we would reconvene and lock it in at 8%. And I think at this point in time, based on where these numbers are going, clearly we won't be able to do it until Mr. Mayor and Ms. Bossy work with our auditors and come out, I guess, officially with the CAFR to know what that locked-in amount is, that we should reformulate that committee and make that change and get up to where we're supposed to be.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Mr.
Does
Chair,
anybody
if I
have
might.
comments on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
As you're looking at that, I would ask you to keep in mind that you might want to let that drag a year. So as you're moving it up, you're moving after we've been there for a little while. My concern at the moment is the situation at the state level and the instability at the state level, or instability?
Instability, yeah.
Instability. I'm very concerned about what they're doing to grants and some of the funding at the municipal level, as they just are projecting, is it $1 billion deficit a year or so from now, and looking at starting to make cuts back at this level they've done with hospitals and other stuff. So my caution is to maybe move a little bit slowly on changing policy. We're not changing reality, but I'd like to avoid a situation where we'd be putting ourselves in a situation where we'd be in violation of our policy because we move too fast on that. The numbers themselves don't change. The rating agencies evaluate us for having a policy and also being within our policy guidelines. After that, they look at the actuals, the 8.4 or the $24 million that we now have gotten up to in our fund balance on that. So I just ask you to take that into consideration as you go through that.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra. Mr. Walsh?
Well, I think we should wait till after the election to form it, but I think we should still at least form the committee, at least to talk about it. And Mr. Tetra, we can be advised along the way. I'm not saying that we do it immediately. I think that the committee has to, number one, reformulate. Number two, confirm that the 8% is still a good number based on where we should be. And I think we'll have some time to figure out where the state is on some of these issues. Being at 8.4%, there still is some wiggle room within there to get to 8. It's not like we're like at 8.01 or something like that, if those numbers work out. Once again, I'm highly cognizant on these numbers are based on estimates, but this is something this committee and this board had talked about beforehand. It might be best to let the election happen and see what happens, and also let the CAFR come out and see what the numbers are. So that probably will not be until February, March. Ms. Bossi, is that correct, the CAFR?
The numbers need to be submitted to
December
the state
31st.
December 31st.
December 31st. When will we have the?
The printed CAFR?
Yeah,
Yeah, normally we do, I think, Joe, we invite him in our February.
February meeting, yeah, okay. So I guess we could look about formulating it back then.
Yep. And can I throw a monkey wrench into that a little bit, if I might? Just something for consideration. If we're going to open the table up again for this type of discussion, we had a discussion earlier tonight about the internal service fund. And one of the drivers of our repeated discussions on the internal service fund is the fact that we're always on the razor's edge on that fund. We've never really built up a surplus balance. So I agree with the concept of looking at our reserve funds and looking at our reserve balances. What I don't fully appreciate, and I think what we could get some guidance on, would we be better keeping, what's our fund balance at now? It's 7.5 is what our stated position is, isn't it?
I believe it's 7.5, based on the fact that it was.
7.75.
7, just over that at the time we said it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I basically think if we do this, which I think is a good idea, we might want to open it up and say, should we look at our reserve funds? Because there might be a method to the madness of saying move more into the internal service fund. You know, maybe raise the general service fund to 7.75, move some of the surplus over to the internal service fund to give us that cushion on a year-over-year basis on the internal service fund, just so that gives us more breathing room to manage should we get into difficulties. Because the last fund that we got a negative comment on from the rating agencies, as I understand, was the internal service fund, not necessarily the general fund, which we rectified that issue 5 or 6 years ago. Correct?
Actually, my first year in office, 2011, we put that extra $2 million into general liability.
Right.
We put another 500,000
No,
in
I'm
surplus.
saying it to the general fund. Remember, we originally got the comment on the general fund when you and I were first on the Board of Finance?
Yes.
We cleared that up a number of years ago.
Well, yeah, we cleared that up by not deficit budgeting anymore and
Right.
stop using surplus to fund operations. That
Correct.
line item might still be out there somewhere, but we haven't funded it that way. You're right, in about 6 or 7 years.
Right. And then, back around 2011 or so, we threw the money into the internal service fund, and we've been managing that very closely. But I don't think any of us are still real comfortable with where the internal service fund is.
Well, I think the general liability accrual number is still a negative. I think
It is negative to the tune of almost $6 million.
Yeah, the health insurance lines for both, the town was negative, it's come back, Board of Ed's gone up and down a bit.
Board of Ed's at like 287,000, but we don't know what the IBNR, if the IBNR goes up by 300,000, they're basically at zero. So in both those lines. It's just something for consideration to
Yeah.
look at our reserve policy as a whole.
I think we should talk about it because we did build in a safety net within that policy that said anything between 8 and 10% could be used towards the internal service fund. So
Correct.
in a way, you're double protecting it if we go below her. You're saying,
Correct.
I want to steal the money now, put it over here, and then once we get up to 8% again, I also want to have that ability as well. So
And I'm
I
not
think
saying
that's
that,
a
I'm saying we gotta-
conversation that
yeah.
we should have.
Yep.
It's just that I think we have an opportunity, because I know that our committees really wanted to get to the 8 and 10%, but we compromised down so that we'd be in compliance with this. And
Yep.
inherent in that compromise was the fact that we'd let it go to 8 to 10%, that anything above 8% could go towards the internal service fund every year. I
Yep.
mean, that means any surplus there from year on out can still go right there. Even the 0.4 could go there right away.
Yep.
So I prefer, just sitting here right now, maybe I'm biased because I'm a member of that committee, that we cure that problem so we can put that policy to bed, bring it up to the 8%, and then work on any surpluses from here on out to go to the internal service fund and work on that problem.
Yeah, I just want an opinion from our
Sure.
bond advisors on that.
Okay.
And realize that because the rating agencies effectively have changed their approach, they now look at all of our reserves together. So they're looking at the overall, including our pension fund and other things in terms of, so we get credit for having the strong pension funding at 100%. So we are doing this to, in essence, set up our balance sheet for how we want it to be. We already have, we're not going to get a higher credit rating than we have right now. We've got the highest one we can from all three. So in essence, we're moving this to make sure our balance looks good and to be, if you will, to balance our balance sheet.
Yeah, and we took that into account when we met. We had full presentations by Matt Spurndell and from others, and that policy had already changed. And after that, it became 8 to 10%. Beforehand, there was communities, and there you could read plenty of stuff regarding Moody's and stuff, where other communities for AAA should be over 10. Some say up to, there's articles I was reading, and I have them in my office. It said 12 to 14, especially in communities like ours where we're near the water and subjected to hurricanes. That's one of the factors. So I understand that we have very good pension, we do OPEB, a lot of our reserve accounts are great, but even after all of that, 8% was still on the lower end of that range. And we were trying to have a range. We weren't saying, let's just try to go to 10. Matter of fact, if we go over 10, we have a whole mechanism for somehow giving the taxpayers relief, whether we use it to reduce taxes, whether we use it to pay back a bond issue or pay down debt or buy a capital item or something else like that. There are safety mechanisms for that. It's, I guess we could look at it all over again, but we did take that into account.
I don't think we need to recreate the wheel. I just think we need to make an educated decision here. That's all. And take everything into consideration. That's all. But I think the idea of being flush with the funds, which is a good thing, and having this option, we ought to take advantage of the option at the appropriate time. So, anything else? Mr. Becker,
Did I?
on which part?
The state, the 512.
Yeah, go right ahead.
That segues a little bit off of the year we're wrapping up, but you open up kind of the concerns up at the state. The governor has sent out a rescission list that had $512,000 for Fairfield. If we could maybe just dive briefly into that. I'm sure information's a little bit scarce, but where we're headed, that's obviously a big chunk already looking into the beginning of our current year. So what do you have for us on that end at this point?
Well, I think is obvious. It's the best that it happened early in the year, so we have time to accommodate that. It's not the panic that it would be, or the dramatic shifts that it might be if it were May or June when that came through. But Mr. Mayor and I have been talking about that and are looking at how to address that in a controlled manner. Bob, do you want to add anything to that?
Do we know when we'll have some sort of an idea of any potential either adjustments within our current budget or where we think we can absorb it based on already being in by a few months?
Yeah, we believe we'll be able to absorb it. We're taking a look at how things are turning out and certainly would like a little bit of actuals and track record to see where we might be running ahead, where we might be running behind, to see where else we have to adjust for that. We've got the whole year worth of adjustments to make also in terms of we don't know what the winter's going to be yet. So if the winter's later, that'd be good. If the winter's another horrible winter like we had last year, it could compound this and we'd have to make some more serious adjustments for that. But we are making our decisions with the realization that we have $500,000 less.
And do we know the areas for the 512 at this time? Is there a breakout? I just saw the top line figure that was published.
It's all pilot.
All out of pilot. Okay. So direct hit. So okay.
Well, it's one of the revenue lines.
Why don't
there.
we keep this into consideration for our first quarterly review meeting for the new fiscal year?
Yeah, that'd be great. All right. Thanks.
Mr. Walsh?
Speaking of the first quarterly review, this is just a thought, maybe we can flesh it out another meeting, but I'm just going to tell you a thought that I had. I don't find personally, I don't know what the rest of you feel, that we get a lot out of that first quarterly review meeting because there's just not, we have like 2 months worth of data out of 3 months. And I'm wondering whether we might want to not have it, because most of the information that comes back from these department heads after we have them go through an exercise is timing, not enough time, seasonal, this, that, the other thing. And the meeting's normally very short. There's not enough data. And whether it would make sense just for the first quarter that we maybe not have a full meeting on it, and maybe make the fiscal officer report to us just to say, hey, has anything happened in the first quarter that we should know about? That would be a surprise if we learned about it at the next quarterly meeting.
We can certainly take that up.
Just
when
to
we
think
do
about.
the- Yeah.
Only
When we
because
do
I
the-
just don't, it just doesn't seem like it's a very worthwhile exercise for the department heads to have to go through it on, can you supply us with every variance on everything for 2 months, and you only, it's really a 3-month, but we only have 2 months worth of data, number one, for the finance department to go through, or for us to spend our time on when there's really not a lot, except if some emergency popped up or something that Bob thought we should know about, that we would look at him and say, why didn't you just tell us about that 3 months ago? So it's just a consideration. It might just save a lot of people time.
Well, when we have our meeting in December to set the schedule for our meetings for the full calendar year, that would be an appropriate time to raise this.
Well, I'm talking about, isn't that first quarter meeting in November?
I think it probably is, but I'm just saying that the schedule's already set. We already have it planned. I mean, we can do it when we do the December meeting.
Okay.
It's also going to have new board members at that time, so it might be worthwhile to just have that meeting to get them used to looking at the reports and things like this first year.
Okay,
That's my only thought on it.
okay. They'll be seated and in place by the end of the month,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I believe they get sworn in around, I'm going to say
20th?
mid-November.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we'll take a look at it.
Okay.
I don't think it's a bad idea. I have one other item I want to bring up. Mr. Mayor, did you have something?
I was just going to, a couple of comments, I guess, based upon this discussion that's just been held. I think Mr. Walsh's idea is, to have some truncated first quarter report, because I agree that the time expended, the resources expended at that time, so we can talk about that actually informally before that meeting even.
Yep.
You could still have the meeting, but have a different product.
Correct.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention is the Internal Service Fund. If you remember, and I'm sure you all do, about 9 months ago when we were looking at this, we were actually looking at a degradation in this fund of about $2 million, I think $1.7 million. All right. And most of that was budgeted. I mean, it was planned. It wasn't like going to be an accident. And initially, I think there was like 1.4, and then the Board of Ed Healthcare got deteriorated. The healthcare deteriorated. So we're looking at like a $1.7 million, $2 million negative impact by the end of the year. Using the Aon number for the Board of Ed in the Internal Service Fund spreadsheet, the change in fund balance 7/114 versus 6/30/15, it only increases by $25,000. So we're basically, even. And if you remember, how many years ago was that a $7 million number? And that was achieved, that minimal deterioration was achieved. And I just want to remind the board, you guys, and this is included in the Board of Ed number, you voted the $500,000 supplement to the Board of Ed line item here. And then there was $180,000 in security that was transferred.
Yep.
And then we had the 700 and the 728,000. So there's a total of $2.1 million that was transferred in from outside sources that helped build this fund up and maintain the balance of the fund. So I'm really happy with where the Internal Service Fund is.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had one item that I wanted to comment, since we're talking about budget items, we're talking about 15 and kind of the impact for 16. And I want to thank Mr. Becker because he pointed this out in his due diligence, and I figured I would just bring it up here since it has been discussed in other public forums. And that is the Registrar of Voters budget. There's some type of consternation and thought process that we cut some money or somebody cut some money from that budget that precludes them from doing the work as to notification of new polling places. I have a document here related to the budget book that shows that the requested amount for their budget for this year was $221,772. And the approved amount from their budget book is $221,772. So it wasn't cut. Now, that's at least from the budget book. Now, more interesting to me that was pointed out was the budget message, and this is what Mr. Becker pointed out that I thought was interesting. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. There's no gotcha here or anything, but I want to make sure we're on the same page. The highlights and goals, the fiscal year 16 fiscal year budget for the municipal election involves the representative town meeting district voting lines. Local redistricting by the representative town meeting that follows the 2010 census has finally occurred as of this budget preparation. And this office, with the assistance of the town engineering department, has implemented the new RTM district lines for the year. Notifying voters about their correct state and local polling locations will be done by this office using funds within this current budget. And that's from the budget message. Thank you for pointing that out.
If I might, just one of your earlier
Yeah.
comments that I just want to be absolutely clear. We will provide the funds that the registrars have asked for to make sure that their plan is implemented.
Yeah, and I don't, and
And-
what, the only thing I was pointing out is, we adopted their plan, and their budget message says
It's,
the amounts are included in their
yeah,
plan.
it's
So-
been pointed out to both registrars on numerous occasions over the past couple of months that their budget was passed without any changes.
Right.
We even went to Ms. Gardner and pulled all the control sheets to show that they were clear that nothing had been changed.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
And just to be clear also to this board, both parties, the Republican Town Committee and the Democratic Town Committee, are working to make sure that the communication and polling places are out. We have a Where Do I Vote link on the front page of the town website. And I met earlier this week with the League of Women Voters, and we'll be working with them to make sure they want to help get the communication out. And obviously, we've reached out to all the candidates that are running and said, please help us as part of your literature handout with making sure people know where to vote. So I think everybody's pulling together on that to fill any gaps there might be in the planned or unplanned communication from the registrars.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Becker, for pointing that out. Any other questions, comments on the budget or any of that? All right, seeing none, the last item on the agenda here is to hear a report of the 2016 budget process from the Budget Subcommittee. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Brown for a quick minute.
So we are in the process of setting up an appointment with Mr. Tetrell's office to ensure that this year, before we make this report, that Mr. Tetrell and his administration has a chance to weigh in. I'll be setting up that meeting this week, and we'll meet within the next couple weeks, and we'll get a report out to this board very shortly.
Any questions or comments from Mr. Brown? All right, seeing none, does anybody have anything else for our board tonight? Great. Do I have a motion? Ms. Cook-Littman, do I have a second? Go with Mr. Mottola. All in favor of adjournment?
Tara.
Opposed, abstentions? We're done. Good night, everybody. Thank you.